So not only would you be encouraged to think differently, but I'm going to even encourage you to act differently as a result of your evolving mindset, because this is all around how we think about things. And it's all around how we do things different based on what we knew before 9 o'clock and what you'll know after 11 o'clock for those who stay in anywhere in between. If you have to leave early, whatever you pick up between now and then, hopefully you can employ something different. But first things first, here's my first video. I got to share it with you. So I'm going to have to do a couple of things just a little bit different. Please bear with me. Deanna. We're going to talk a little bit about peanut butter and jelly. It's okay. Don't apologize. It's okay. This virtual technology, many of us are getting accustomed to it. So please don't judge us. Those of us who are a little bit not as savvy as others. It's a learning process. I'm not here to judge today.
Implicit bias.
Implicit bias.
Implicit bias.
2016 was the year that implicit bias went somewhat mainstream.
Yeah, so when Hillary Clinton mentioned implicit bias in the debates, our phones started blowing up, all our friends started emailing us about it.
But what is implicit bias? Implicit biases are basically thought processes that happen without you even knowing it. Little mental shortcuts that hold judgments you might not agree with. And sometimes those shortcuts are based on race. First, some clarity. Saying someone has an implicit bias is different from calling someone a racist.
The word racist is a highly loaded term, right, here in American society. A lot of times, when people are using it, they're thinking of the kind of old-fashioned Ku Klux Klan style racist.
But implicit bias isn't anywhere near that, explicit.
Implicit bias is something that comes out of ordinary mental functioning, out of how the mind normally works.
We've all grown up in a culture with media images, news images, conversations we heard at home, our education. Think of that as a fog we've been breathing our whole life. We never even realized it, what we were taking in.
And that fog causes associations that lead to biases.
I somehow know that if you say peanut butter, I'm going to say jelly. That's an association that's been ingrained in me because throughout my life, peanut butter and jelly are together. And in many forms of media, there is an overrepresentation of Black men and violent crime being paired together.
And because of that, I actually deep down inside have been taught that Black men are violent and aggressive and not to be trusted, that they're criminals, that they're thugs.
With all those associations, I'm not trying to let us off the hook, but in some ways, none of us stood a chance.
Starting today, we'll post a video a day dealing with one challenge of understanding implicit bias and its relationship to race and exploring ways we might combat the problem. One more thing, if you're seeing this and thinking that it doesn't apply to you, well, you might be falling prey to the blind spot bias. That's the scientific name for a mental bias that allows you to see biases in others, but not in yourself. We're biased.
So what are your thoughts?
Zoom meeting, implicit bias. You might want to watch it, get your coffee. It's interesting.
Oh, maybe I would.
Presentation. Yeah, I hear somebody else is being invited to watch the program. That's awesome. We're already sharing this information. It's great. I love it. So that's where we are with the beginning of implicit bias. So anybody have any thoughts, any comments?
For the blind spot.
Yep.
That caught my attention.
Please. Tell me more.
I guess because it's, again, it's easier to see it in others and call it out.
Yep.
And make it easy to believe that that what everyone else is doing is explicit, right?
Yep.
Even though we're talking about implicit, but that it's explicit in their actions and how they're dealing with folks on a day-to-day basis. But to not be able to see that in yourself, or even if you see it, but you use excuses to say, well, this is why I feel this way, or this is why I feel this way. But the blind spot just, it's just an interesting term.
Yep.
The way it's used.
Yep.
Even more so interesting when you realize that there is no excuse.
Mm.
There is no excuse.
Yeah.
So that's deep.
Yeah. So Deanna's bringing up a very good point, that whole notion about the blind spot. We're humans, right? And our human nature, our human condition is generally we see fault in others, but we tend not to see fault in ourselves in situations such as these. And when we are able to take some introspective thought time, oftentimes we don't want to admit that what we're doing is not appropriate. As Deanna said, we in turn, instead we justify our actions. So it's okay when I do it, but it's not okay when you do it, essentially. And that's often how we as humans work. But the whole notion here is to have a paradigm shift for those of us who are in this conversation. When we talk about the operating system, what I'm talking about is the brain. So the brain is, as was noted in the video, it's the way we're wired to have these biases. And our brain, as the primary operating system, there are two layers that I'm going to refer to today, and that's the conscious mind and the unconscious mind. So the conscious mind are those things that we're aware of. We see, we feel, we touch, we're aware of our surroundings, our environment, our actions, our interactions, our thoughts. The unconscious mind are those activities of the brain that are happening without our awareness. So conscious mind, awareness; unconscious mind, we're not aware. And there's a whole lot happening under the water level. Oftentimes we see the iceberg effect. I thought this visual was really cool because the polar bear is up there at the top, right? Just kind of looking around, but there's an orca that's generally below the surface of the water that the polar bear might not be able to see from his viewpoint. And that's how it works with this unconscious bias. Now there's unconscious bias, implicit bias, and there's also explicit bias. Remember in the video, he says that unconscious bias doesn't necessarily mean that we're racist. And I'm not here to talk about race and racism per se today. That's another conversation that I'm willing to be in. But I'm here to talk about what we know and what's going on in our minds that we don't know. And with that, the operating system, from all of the sensory input that we have, from all of our five senses, our touch, our hearing, our taste, all of our five senses, there are approximately, or can be at any given time, 11 million pieces of information that are coming through our brain at any given moment. Now, from those 11 million pieces of information, of data, if I can refer to it as data, only 40 to 50 pieces of data do we use in our conscious processing. Think about that number, ladies and gentlemen. 11 million coming in, 40 to 50 million that we're able to process. And only 7 of those 40 to 50 million are we able to manage in our short-term memory? So again, I gotta keep saying it because this is like, to me, like, wow. 11 million pieces of data at any given moment in our existence coming in through our sensory and going through our nervous system to our brain, and we're only able to process 40 to 50 pieces of that. To me, that's phenomenal. I don't know about you, but that's phenomenal. So what happens with all of that 10,999,000 pieces of data? Well, the brain has to have some way to deal with that amount of data. So I'm gonna think back to when I was teaching at IUSB, and I was teaching a class, and it was during the 90s, and I learned something that it was just like, wow to me, another wow. The 1990s was the decade of the brain. So the National Science Institute and the government used the decade of the 90s to start to really explore the brain and to see what was going on with the brain. Normally, when we thought about the brain, we thought of it as pathologies, mental illnesses, and things like that. But in the 90s, we started really looking at what does the healthy brain look like and what is actually the functioning of the brain. And some of you may have heard of the fMRI, the functional MRI, where they can do an MRI of your brain. They can scan your brain in the moment, real time, to see how the brain is functioning. And since then, we've learned a lot about the brain. Initially, they referred to the brain as being lazy. Now, I don't like that term. I like to use the term efficient. The brain is efficient, and the brain wants to be efficient because if you think about it, again, 11 million pieces of data at any given time, that brain is going to have to work it some way, right? It's like a huge mainframe computer. Efficient, yes. Effective, not always. The brain has to have some mechanism to rapidly process all of that data that it's being bombarded with and exposed to every day. So what did the brain do, or how did it takes that data and rapidly and automatically processes it, and it puts it into categories. That's awesome because it has a way to rapidly process it. However, in that rapid processing, sometimes inaccuracies happen. And those inaccuracies become discrepancies in our way of thinking and engaging, and they can also formulate these unconscious biases. So for those of you who are realtors in the room, I got some questions, and these questions, and I'm gonna ask everybody in the room to read a book entitled Biased by Jennifer Eberhardt. And the questions that from 3 through 8 are going to be adaptations of those questions from her book. Now, I'm gonna warn you. It's a difficult read because she talks a lot about the police situation, and she talks a lot about how how biases have impacted the relationship between police force individuals and community. And it's a difficult read, but it's also an enlightening and an engaging read because that's how the bulk of her book goes. But a lot of it is based on her experiences and her research and other things. It's not all about what's happening with the police and the community. There is actually a part in one chapter that she talks about neighborhoods. And these questions she has in her appendices. And one of the questions is, why did you choose the neighborhood where you currently live? And I thought, since we were talking to realtors, these would be some good questions to explore. But I want everybody, it's not just about realtors, I want everybody to think about this. And I want somebody to chime in. Why did you choose the neighborhood where you currently live? Anybody?
Location, location, location.
Sweet. And what was it about that location?
Well, I liked that there were 6 grocery stores within a few minutes. There was a mall within a couple minutes. There was a bypass I could get to Elkhart or the airport in 15 minutes nonstop. So convenience, I suppose, was the main thing for me.
I love that. Thank you. Was that Penny?
Yes.
Sounds like Penny's voice. Penny, thank you. So I love that. You said location. 6 grocery stores. I can get to the mall. I can get to the airport. I can get to Elkhart. Convenience, right? And you are blessed that you have 6 grocery stores that you can conveniently access, right? Based on your location.
Right.
Thank you.
I'll jump in. Quality of life, from the perspective of good schools, recreational opportunities, safety, quiet neighborhoods without a lot of traffic.
Okay. So geographically, there are good schools. Safety, that's huge, right? Quiet, not a lot of traffic. Nice. That you could choose those particular criteria or amenities. Would anybody else like to weigh in?
Can you hear me okay?
Oh, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Ed. Well,
Yes.
I chose the neighborhood that I chose. One is that the makeup of the neighborhood have people that look like me, okay? And I wanted my children to be able to engage with people of different races, backgrounds, etc., which I felt would be important for their growth and development.
Thank you, right? So it's the diversity of the demographics that you chose, and you wanted, Ed, to have your children to offer them the experience of the variety of diversity that was offered in your neighborhood. That's awesome. Thank you.
I want to share my experience. We're actually not allowed to look at the house that we're currently in. The realtor showed us lighted areas and was actually proud of the word because she kept saying, you know, this is the up and coming neighborhood. So when we saw another house at a different location, it was a HUD home. And we were not happy with the location. So we saw a house that was actually past Lombardi, closer to Mayflower Road. And she was very hesitant and wasn't too happy about our request to see the home, because we continued to push to see the house. You know, we went in, we saw it, we liked it, we qualified for it, and 25 plus years later, we're still living in the home, or the house, I should say. And it was a very negative experience, but because you're so ready to move, the last thing you want is for someone to tell you no. Our closing experience was just as bad with the owners of the home. And all around, it was a negative experience. But like I said, 25 plus years later, we're still in the house. But that was our experience. So, and I'm speaking on the experience that we had with the realtor. And so, yeah, that was my experience. And so we ended up where we wanted to end up, but not without having to push has some barriers. And I do believe that we were treated differently because we were Latino and it was a female-led household. And we were coming from just not the best economically situated life at that point. So that's my experience. And this is Diana.
Deanna, thank you for sharing of yourself and that story.
I would like to weigh in on the question.
Please.
When choosing this neighborhood, it was the proximity to the school, and it was very diverse, and there was a lot of children within my children age group. So it just seemed idealistically and financially, it also worked out. But now that my children are of age and I'm actively doing my grandmother role, I'm less pleased with the neighborhood due to all the different changes that have happened over the last 8 years. And so now as I look towards to move, my consideration for looking for a neighborhood is different. I would like a diverse community with less traffic and less things going on so that I can feel more comfortable being out enjoying time with my grandchildren.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tim Berkey. We chose the neighborhood we live in based on it's close to where I do most of my work. It's close to our church. And since we homeschool, the school system didn't matter. So we were able to get a little bit more home for the same money. And it's really a good location, close to everything we do, our friends and family and community. So that's why we chose where we live.
Sweet. Thank you. Thank you, Tim. And thank you to the young lady that spoke before you. I'm sorry I didn't get your name.
Oh, it's Leanne Washington.
Hi, Leanne. Thank you for weighing in. Your neighborhood, does it reflect diversity in class, age, gender, socioeconomic status? That can simply be a yes or no.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, mine does.
Yes.
Thank you.
I guess I wonder how much class diversity there could be, or socioeconomic status there could be in a neighborhood, because usually homes in a particular neighborhood are within a price range, right? Like some are 60 to 100, some are 2 to 400, some are higher, everywhere in between. Age and gender and ethnicity and stuff, I'm sure are diverse within different neighborhoods, but I don't know. Class and socioeconomic status, is that possible within a neighborhood?
I think so. This is Leanne again. Because within this neighborhood, you have homeowners and you have renters. Homeowners are in a different economic status than most renters. And then there are renters that just rent because they don't want the responsibility of owning a home. But from my experience, most renters are renting because they can't afford to buy that very home that they live in.
Good answer. Yeah. Right. And there's some validity as well as to what Tim was saying, as well as to what Leanne is saying. So it's a both and, right? So neighborhoods at some point can be open to anybody, right? There are some neighborhoods that no matter what your class, your socioeconomic status, if you choose to live there, if you can afford it, guess what? You can live there, right? There are some neighborhoods when it comes to class and socioeconomic status, if you can't afford to live there, whether you're renting or owning, you can't live there, Tim. So your point is absolutely right in that respect. So it just depends upon the neighborhood when it comes to class and socioeconomic status. And there are some neighborhoods that are intentionally not designed for people who are considered lower class and lower socioeconomic status. And as Deanna's example is reflective of that, based on the person who was trying to secure a home for her. So it works both ways.
I have a comment. It's Penny.
Hi, Penny.
I've been a realtor over 40 years, and in my first year or two that I was in the business, we were on a bus trip, and an older realtor said to me when we were over in Deanna's neighborhood, "This is where you bring your classy minority clients." First of all, I was kind of shocked by even suggesting that they belonged somewhere, but it was interesting that she recognized that they were classy. But it was, of course, that's, frightening to think about now, and it was frightening to think about then. I didn't understand that kind of concept at all, but I know there were no doubt a lot of older realtors that absolutely felt that way, that, they were steering. And of course, they're not doing that anymore, but I would hope. But I just couldn't help but remember that situation and how sad it made me feel.
I am sorry, Penny, that you had to have that experience. Unfortunately, many people have had to have that experience.
Yeah.
And I would like to believe that those things don't happen anymore. Yet, why are we having this conversation today?
Right.
Right. So with these unconscious biases, they may not be consciously happening, and quite honestly, I'm going to put my neck out on the table and say some of it is explicit. Mm-hmm. Some people do know that that's what they're doing. It's not appropriate. It's not legal. It's not ethical. It's not moral. But yet things still do happen.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah. And number 5, Deanna spoke very clearly to that one. So I'm not going to linger here too much unless someone else has something to express around having experience bias in buying, selling, or renting a home. Penny has spoken to it as well. But does anybody else want to weigh in on this question at all?
Myron, this is Deanna.
Would you mind sharing a little bit about the Long Island study that was done that you
Sure.
shared with me,
Sure.
and the reason for this training?
Yeah.
This development opportunity.
Yeah. The Newsday did a 3-year study on the real estate market in Long Island, which Long Island, New York, has a history of basically being questionable in terms of how fair the housing market was with regard to diversity. And so they hired actors, they hired people to come in and do blind studies based upon the racial background or the ethnic background of potential home purchasers. And what they would do is they would have almost identical socioeconomic background with just a different ethnic makeup, going to the same realtor in the same real estate office, looking for the same type of home in the same price range, almost identical employment backgrounds and financial backgrounds, and they got extremely different results in terms of how the realtor in these studies would react and what properties they would show them, in terms of the neighborhood, the issues in the neighborhood, the school systems, the crime activity, and in, oh gosh, over 3 years, it was close to 60% were shown as being very biased in terms of how they would react to potential customers, and clearly, with the same financial wherewithal, with same desires and things, and being shown different neighborhoods in different areas, very clearly showing bias, and it really took the National Association of Realtors kind of by storm, so that they really upped their game in terms of making people, especially realtors, aware of the bias issues that we're still seeing with regard to fair housing and things like that. And so it was very eye-opening when I reviewed the study.
Yeah. I actually, Deanna shared that with me, and I looked it up, and I read the study as well. So thank you, Myron. I'm not bringing to the table, my other disclaimer is I am not bringing to the table any experience in real estate. So I prefer those of you who are in real estate to speak to your profession. But what I will say is that late 80s, early 90s, there was an investigative study, or story actually, done on one of the major networks, and I believe the name of it was called True Colors, where they exposed real estate, or no, they exposed homeowners and perhaps real estate people. It has something to do with the same concept. They got two gentlemen, one African American and one Caucasian, same age, same credentials, same class, socioeconomic status. The only difference was the color of their skin. And they did the exact same thing. They would send people in to check in on an ad. They were based on ads in the newspaper, if I recall correctly. 30, 40 years ago, 3 or 4 decades ago, this same phenomenon is there. And the African-American gentleman would walk in and say, I'm coming in to check on the ad in the paper. And the guy said to him, "We've already filled that vacancy." Then the Caucasian young man walks in the door and he asks about the ad in the paper. And then the guy goes on to tell him about all the amenities and how wonderful the apartment is and yada, 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 yada. And it was still available. And when the person from the TV channel or the broadcasting station would go in and say, we just witnessed this happening and so on and so forth, then at that moment, the person didn't want to talk about it. Same thing, they walked into a shoe store. The African-American gentleman, he's walking around waiting for somebody to ask, "Can I help you?" Nobody ever approaches him. Young man, the Caucasian man, he walks into the shoe store and immediately walking in, he gets help. So some of these biases that occur, whether they're explicit or implicit, they still do happen. So we need to be aware of it, and we need to know our role in it. And that's why we're having this development opportunity today. So I'm going to show you another video. This one is just a little bit longer. This one is by Dushaw Hackett, and Alyssa's coming over to get it queued up for me. But as you're going into the video, here's the food for thought that I want you to talk to me about. What comes to mind for you personally and professionally as you watch the video? So I'm going to get out of the way and let Alyssa work her magic, and the video will start shortly thereafter.
I want to make an argument to you. I want to make a case to you. And the argument that I want to make is that the way that we currently think about, talk about, and act on issues of racial bias and other lines of difference in this country is woefully inadequate and it's incomplete. The way we think about, talk about, and act on issues of racial bias and other lines of difference in this country is woefully inadequate and it's incomplete. And in making this case, I want to build on the very robust and compelling evidence that has been coming out of the science community for the past 10 plus years that suggests that if we want to move to a radically different place, a radically better place on issues of race and difference in this country, we have to pay attention to something called implicit bias. So what is implicit bias? Oprah Winfrey has talked about it. Malcolm Gladwell has written about it. Normally we say when Oprah is talking about it and Malcolm is writing about it, everybody knows about it, which is not the case. So, a bias is a preference for or a prejudice against a person or a group of people. There are three characteristics that make a bias implicit. Characteristic number one, implicit biases operate at the subconscious level, outside of conscious awareness. We don't know that we have them, and they can't be accessed through introspection. In other words, the science of implicit bias says that none of us can sit here in this room right now, scratch our heads, and wonder out loud, do I have a bias against men, against women, against black people, against white people, against immigrants, and expect to accurately answer that question, because the nature of an implicit bias is such that we don't know that we have them. Characteristic number two, implicit biases oftentimes run contrary to our conscious stated beliefs about who we are as human beings and what our values are. In other words, the science of implicit bias says that you can be a school administrator and say that you are deeply committed to nurturing and building up young people, and yet be the same school administrator who leads your school in high rates of suspensions and expulsions of young people. And both of those things would be true. Consciously, you're deeply committed to building young people up. Unconsciously, you're doing harm in the process. The science of implicit bias says that you can be a law enforcement officer deeply committed to the mantra that appears on the side of police vehicles that says what? Protect and serve. And yet be the same law enforcement officer who leads your precinct or your district in high rates of stops and frisks of young men of color. And both of those things would be true. Consciously, you're deeply committed to the principles of protecting and serving. Unconsciously, your behavior is inconsistent with that. The third characteristic that makes a bias implicit is that implicit biases are triggered through rapid and automatic mental associations that we make between people, ideas, and objects, and the attitudes and stereotypes that we hold about those people, ideas, and objects. So, case in point, I want to do a quick exercise around the power of mental association. So in a minute, I'm going to flash a few words on the screen. And what I want to ask you to do is I want you to quickly reflect on and or call out the associations that you make with those words, or that you believe the broader society makes with those words. And so this requires a little bit of call and response. So, government. Corporate. Suburbs. Subsidized housing. So the science of implicit bias would say that those associations that you just made, those aren't mere verbal associations. Those aren't mere mental associations. The science says that there are attitudes and behaviors that we attach to those associations. So imagine if, as part of my introduction, I came out here and I said, my name is Deshaw. I want to talk with you about something innovative. And I'm here representing local government. I used to work in corporate America. I was born and raised in subsidized housing, but I now live in the suburbs of Alexandria, Virginia. The science would suggest that for many of you, for those who said that your automatic mental association with government is corrupt, or your automatic mental association with corporate is greed, you would receive me through that filter, oftentimes at the unconscious level. And it would color for you every single word that comes out of my mouth. So that's how implicit bias works. These rapid and automatic mental associations that shape and mold behavior every single day, oftentimes in ways that we're not even aware of, oftentimes in ways that do harm to others. So there are three reasons why focusing on implicit bias at this particular moment in time is important, and why I believe that a focus on implicit bias can help move this country forward. So, number one, an implicit bias focus gives us a much more expansive diagnosis of the challenges that we face in this country with respect to difference. What do I mean? We know from the work of esteemed scholars Mazarin Banaji and Anthony Greenwald that a significant amount of the harm being experienced and transmitted in this country with respect to racial bias and other lines of difference, we know that a significant amount of that harm stems from implicit forms of bias in addition to explicit forms of bias. Yet the majority of the tools that we use to address bias are designed to address explicit forms, not the implicit. So in essence, what we have in this country is a mismatch, a disconnect between how we diagnose challenges around difference and how we treat them. An implicit bias approach gives us a much more expansive diagnosis and a much more expansive toolbox. And my belief is that if we get the diagnosis right, we will get the treatment right. If we continue to get the diagnosis wrong, we will get the treatment. Number two, implicit bias is both predictive and it's preventive. Predictive in the sense that a person can go to the website for Project Implicit, take any one of the online implicit association tests, and receive a test result that can serve as a predictor of discriminatory behavior. It's preventive in the sense that there are emerging and promising strategies coming out of the science community that suggest with internal motivation and habitual practice, we can do things to reduce our vulnerability to act on our biases. And I believe that that is what the country needs right now. We need a preventive approach around issues of bias and difference versus an emergency room response. Right now, an emergency room response. We wait for stuff to happen, then we rush to the emergency room. We need a prevention approach, and implicit bias gives us that. Lastly, in number three, implicit bias, or an implicit bias approach, helps to reduce the shame and the shaming that's associated with talking about and addressing issues of bias. Author and researcher Brene Brown draws an interesting distinction between guilt and shame. She says, guilt says, I made a mistake and I can do something about it. Shame says, I am a mistake. This is who I am. I'm a horrible human being. There's nothing I can do about it. I'm going to always be this way. And what I want to submit to you is that my belief is that one of the biggest challenges that we have in this country and how we address issues of bias is that we engage in self-shaming. And if we're honest, sometimes we intentionally and unintentionally shame others. And my belief is that as long as we continue to do that, human beings would never feel the motivation they need to do the self-change work or the broader societal change work that we need to do. An implicit bias approach addresses this because it makes the central question not are you racist or not racist, are you sexist or not sexist. An implicit bias approach makes the central question, how do we get our actions and behaviors, how do we align our actions and behaviors with our consciously held egalitarian beliefs? Or at least for those people who do hold egalitarian beliefs. My belief is that many people do. So that's why this work is important at this particular moment in time. And in closing, I want to leave you with a quick idea. The late child psychologist Yuri Bronfenbrenner once said that every child needs at least one adult in his or her life who is irrationally crazy about him or her. Raise your hand if you've had that at any point in your life. And so you know what it feels like. My belief is that not only does every child need that, but every human being needs at least one other human being in their life who is irrationally crazy about him or her. And the only way that we're going to have that is if we do the internal change work that we need to do to make the external change work possible. Thank you very much.
Sorry. All right, I'm interested. What are your thoughts? That's where I left you. We didn't serve you breakfast with food, but we served you breakfast with information. How about that? So what came to mind for you personally and professionally as you watched Shaw speak about implicit bias, our biases, how they happen, and what we can do differently about them?
I really was drawn to his comments about the difference between guilt and shame, and how often we lock ourselves into an idea of who we are and our behaviors simply because, that's who I am and I can't change, rather than recognizing that, hey, we all make mistakes. We all have moments when we don't use good judgment or are on our best behavior, but we can change that if we want to, and if we see the value in ourselves to do that. And I think for a lot of people, society has kind of bludgeoned them down to the point where they say, this is just who I am and I can't change, and so why even bother thinking or trying?
Yeah. So again, mindset. This is really a lot about our mindset, right? Whether we're thinking about if we want to or if we don't, if we're fearful, if we're not, if we have a desire to do the introspection. He talked about the commitment for change. It's a commitment and it takes continual practice. Well, first and foremost, we got to get our mind right about it. Yeah, we all make mistakes. We all have unconscious biases, and we've all made mistakes based on those unconscious biases. But that doesn't make us bad people. It just makes us human, and it gives us opportunity to not make the same mistake again. Right? So thank you. Was that Myron?
Yes, it was. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Myron.
You're welcome.
Anyone else? What comes to mind for you personally and professionally as you watch the film?
It's Penny. I couldn't help but think about a time when I was in student government trying to get a daycare center established at IUSB. And I ran for student government, and the president of student government ended up, the guy that won was the African-American gentleman. And he said something to me once that really hit home. And I had never thought about it before, but he said, that is so, I said something, and he said, that is so white of you to think because you want this to happen, it's going to happen. And he said, we can't ever think that way. We, meaning African Americans, don't have that ability because we have to fight for it. And I'd never thought about that before. So it really hit home.
Thank you, Penny.
Yeah, it was interesting.
I have something I'd like to share. And this is Deanna. So, for years we've seen on TV, and now also, of course, social media, just about the issues that are occurring in the world right now, and just also mindful of what come about through COVID, just the health disparities, the socioeconomic status of individuals, and the whole rental issue as well, and the housing. And the brain is so overcrowded, and I don't know if that's the correct verbiage, but I'm going to use it. With everything that's happening, you've got so much going on, so much coming in, and just to think that there are 11,000 pieces of information that we process. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that it's a heavy time, and we're many who are trying to make a committed effort to change, and know that you're guilty in some respect because of perhaps what you may or may not do on a daily basis. And not to turn around and shame others for being more explicit, I guess, about their actions. I don't know if I'm explaining that correctly. And I'm thinking about the just like the not the marches, but the rioting, just everything that's happening currently with the local, of course, police departments, etc. And so it's a heavy time. And maybe mine's just a comment, not necessarily looking for an answer, but it's a heavy time with everything that we're seeing, I guess. And so the whole guilt and shame comments caught my attention as well, because it's almost like a daily issue, moment to moment issue that we're dealing with. It's just, so that's my comment.
Thank you, Deanna.
One comment that I had was when the words were first projected and folks were asked to give their associations, it occurred to me that how many of those associations that instantly came to mind were a result of media, and that there are, I know, in this country kind of two media branches, and that there are many people who listen to one or the other, and I think that affects, that it really kind of hit home to me just how much that subconscious, I guess, taking in of that information through the media affects unconscious bias. So that was just interesting.
Thank you for that comment. So what I heard was a couple of you picked up on the guilt and shame, the notion of the brain being so overloaded right now with a lot of very heavy things with our, public health and our social and civil unrest, and in addition to the daily stressors that many of us encounter consistently, and the added layer of the media and how it can add to our biases, there is a lot. There is a lot for us to process. Yet we have to be sure that we recognize and have some awareness around more than we are being aware of right now, and setting priority to what's really important for us. If we know the media is not giving us accurate information, then maybe just a little bit less of the media. If we understand that our situation around COVID is too overwhelming, maybe we don't focus as much on COVID. We only focus on what is within our control, what is within our conscious awareness and in our control, and let the rest go. And where I'm going with this, as I would say to anyone who might come to me and say, you know, Kimberly, I'm just overwhelmed in a session of coaching, I would have to ask them to take the step back and say, what's most important to you right now? And within that frame of reference, what's most important to you right now, when you get to the point of changing the mindset as it relates to our implicit bias, then focus on that thing in the frame of reference of implicit bias. Don't try to do it all. We can't do it all. We can't manage all the thoughts, all the sensory inputs, but we do have some control over what we can manage. So that's my word of wisdom there. So I'm going to take us back to stereotypes about different social groups. How are they grounded in beliefs about the conditions of the spaces that groups occupy? So we're kind of finishing up with the stories around, or the questions around where people live and what are the demographics of those spaces. How do these stereotypes perpetuate conditions of those neighborhoods?
It's Penny. Again, seemed like I've always got something to say.
I appreciate it, Penny. I appreciate it. Thank you.
I'm always shocked. Tenants call. I have several rental properties, and tenants will call and say, do you take Section 8, vouchers? And I said, of course, that's a great program. And they'll say, you do? Like they're constantly told, no, they don't take Section 8. And I have to wonder if that's just their, these landlords that say no, why wouldn't they? I mean, the check comes to the landlord every month, and usually it's the greatest part of it, the tenant pays part, but it's a wonderful program. And I'm just always shocked that, so many of them are saying no. And I don't know if they don't want to keep their properties up, if they think they're going to make them, with an annual inspection, do some things they don't want to spend money on, or if they just presume that, these are minorities in their bias, that they're going to have the boyfriend move in, it's not on the lease. And I've heard those kind of comments from landlords. But it's pretty pathetic. But, if you have nice homes and you let somebody in that the government is helping with them rent, my experience has been that, it's just, they're wonderful tenants. They're so appreciative of having a nice home in a good area where it's not high crime. And I just, it just has kind of shocked me to hear the shock when they say, like they can't believe it. That must be a lot of rejection that they're getting from a lot of people.
I'm sorry to hear that, but
yeah.
I'm happy that you are not the individual who turns down those individuals based on stereotypical beliefs.
Of course not.
Yep. So how do these stereotypes perpetuate conditions of neighborhoods where social groups who can't seem to fit in other places, for a lack of a different way to say that?
Well, white flight was one example.
Yes.
In the separate but equal days, HUD would make loans to white people out in the suburbs. And there was a neighborhood around Pearly School that you couldn't buy in there and build a home if you were black, if you were white. That was strictly for blacks. And Bethel, over across from Bethel College, you couldn't sell your house in that Burcliffe neighborhood to anybody black or Jewish. And it was right in their, what is it that you get? Anyway, it shocked me that the government was involved in that, but it was considered separate but equal and a good thing, I guess. I don't know, but you know.
So our government is based on the mindset of the leader.
That's true.
Right?
Yeah.
That's all I'm going to say about that. I didn't come to get political. That's all I'm going to stop there.
Yeah.
Anyone else have a thought?
This is Deanna. I kind of want to share that you can also see where steering occurs with folks who are looking to rent. And so they're either steered out of a neighborhood or steered towards a neighborhood. And then there's of course, there's the blockbusting. And those are not just things that occurred years ago, they're still occurring to this day.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a little bit more hidden, but still very explicit. When you look up at the makeup of the neighborhoods. And then sometimes, again, folks who are in the neighborhoods that they don't necessarily want to be in. And we're talking about not just based on your race or your sex, but based on perhaps where someone led you to that particular neighborhood because they thought that's where you should be, or you're more comfortable, or how far your dollar takes you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So Deanna spoke to this one just a little bit, even though she didn't give names. And Penny spoke to it as well, right? From Jim Crow to racial zoning ordinances to racial covenants. Bias migrates across systems, geography, and generations. And again, we're still in the same conversation that we've been in since, right? Decades, right?
Right.
And Deanna said it's subtle, but still the proof is in the pudding. So the steering is subtle. It may not be blatant in your face, but relative to the last question that was posed, these two go very closely together. How do these stereotypes perpetuate the conditions of those neighborhoods? I think of my own neighborhood. I was going to be the presenter, but I'd like to add just a little bit of content as well. And growing up, my mom still lives in the home that she and my dad started to purchase the year that I was born. She's still in that home. When we moved into that neighborhood, it was a ethnic, racially, socioeconomically diverse neighborhood. It was the kind of neighborhood that was close to the school, a good school, good schools, grocery stores. We had access to nutritional foods. We didn't live in a food desert. We had the ability to be, if we chose or needed, because at one point we needed to use public transportation to go back and forth to school. So it was a neighborhood that was safe, friendly, and it was appropriate to a family. Over time, however, that neighborhood got to the point where there were dilapidated homes. The homes were no longer taken care of. White flight happened, as Penny mentioned, over time. And it left mostly ethnic and racial residents, and mostly African American. homes started to, we had more renters than homeowners. And unfortunately, some of the homes weren't well taken care of once they were not occupied anymore. So we had the homes that started to deteriorate, and some of them were torn down. So that meant that we had blank spaces, blank lots in our community, to the point where I live probably, or my mom lives probably a half a mile from a major street. And growing up, there used to be houses all along that pathway between our home and the major street that ran maybe a half a mile down that runs parallel. I can now sit in my mom's porch and look all the way down the street to that major street that's about half a mile away, where as a child, there used to be homes and trees and bushes, and they're not there anymore. However, recently, there has been the shift that particular area, and we had a lot of the, I can't think of the word that I want to use right now, but that particular area, there has been some improvement in that area. New homes are being built. The community now is more open to, it's becoming to be now more racially and ethnically diverse. And so now it looks like the neighborhood that I used to live in, right? But just to think about how the stereotypes perpetuate the conditions of the neighborhoods is something that many of us have witnessed and something that many of us have lived, just based on certain categories of who we are. And then the whole notion of, I'm sorry, I went the wrong way. The whole notion of what policies continue to promote these disparities. And the question that was in the book is racial disparities. I almost changed that terminology to underrepresented and underserved. And I'm going to just say it here. What current policies continue to promote disparities for our underrepresented groups and our underserved groups? Because it's still happening. It's still happening. So just again, food for thought. I'm going to pause and see if anyone has a comment here.
One thing in the real estate community, just in terms of the availability of getting a mortgage for properties under a certain price, while the federal government doesn't put any restrictions on the cost of a home, the banking and lending community basically looks at loans under a certain amount and says we can't make enough money on the loan to make it worth our while. And so you tend to see homes under, say, $40,000 thereabouts that people generally can't get a traditional mortgage on, which limits the ability to purchase a home, limits the ability to move from being a renter to being a homeowner. And so those are some of the things that I see in the real estate market that have to be addressed in some way to really improve our ability to make home ownership available in more of an equitable way.
Thank you, Myron. That's capitalism, right?
Well, yes and no. Okay. To a certain extent, yeah, it's about the bottom line for banks getting to make a certain amount of money on the loans they make. But yeah, it does come to the profit margin. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was a question. It wasn't a statement. All right. So thanks for answering.
Sure.
So here's the big one. For those who are in housing or for whatever service you provide to your clients, what role might your biases be playing in limiting options? Here I put underrepresented and underserved groups. What biases might be getting in the way Or let's even say, what organizational biases? It might not be yours specifically, but I'd still like for you to think of, we still need to be thinking of our own. Well, what are some of the organizational biases that might be limiting options for our underrepresented, underserved groups?
So I want to share what I've heard, and primarily because of the folks that we deal with. So oftentimes what we hear is that, and Penny mentioned this earlier, was recipients who receive the housing choice voucher, which is Section 8. And oftentimes what we hear is that landlords refuse to rent, and sometimes the refusal comes with comments. And the comments are based on stereotypical thinking and assumptions. And so our recipients usually hear that. And so they sometimes stop trying, or it's made very difficult for them to actually find housing. And oftentimes we are also dealing with individuals that have mental disabilities, and the landlord perhaps doesn't want to deal with that. It's too much. It's overwhelming for them. But then we also have even folks in public housing, and I'm speaking more so along what the government offers and in their programming. And public housing, some of the issues that we dealt with mainly have been the accommodations or failure to accommodate individuals with disabilities. In the modification portion of it, and then also, of course, just the initial accommodation. But then we've also heard from folks who are renting, who would like to rent. And oftentimes we hear about the female-led household, which is still, currently an issue. Or if it's a single-family household. So we're running along the issues of gender, or if you have too many children. And we've heard those comments as well. So we change up our policies and our procedures as to how we make that individual prove that they can rent the house or should be in that area. So I'm going based on some of the information that we've come through based on what we do, which is, of course, filing discrimination complaints in housing.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
It's Penny here. I've heard landlords say that they are opposed to somebody with very many children being in an upstairs apartment because the people below have complained in the past about noise, and they get that unconscious bias and they turn people away that have children because they've, had these complaints before. And, I'm sure that's going on quite a bit too.
Yeah. Yeah. So as Dushaw said, these unintentional, unaware, unconscious biases that we have, they do impact others. They impact us in our inability to to see a bigger picture, number one, and to offer empathy. I love that Penny mentioned before, put ourselves in someone else's shoes, number two. And then number three, the consequences, the larger consequences that our actions, interactions, and our outcomes. When we start, as Dushaw on the video said, when we start to really think about it, is predictive and it is preventive, our biases. And if we look at the biases without the notion of the shame game, whether we're ashamed or we're trying to shame other people into their shame based on us, our blind spots, because we tend not to think about our own. Oftentimes we tend to pick up on others first. And then again, that blind spot of, in a different frame of reference, we don't know what we don't know. So when someone makes us aware and we choose to do things different or not, there is our opportunity. But it takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of commitment to start to really tune into where we have some biases. So now I just want to know, what are you feeling in this moment? Everybody in the room, I just want you to give me one word. What are you feeling in this moment? Elisa, do we know how many people are on the call? 12. Out of 12 people, I want one word to tell me what you're feeling right now.
I'll go. It's Myron. Conflicted.
Thank you, Myron. Grateful. Thank you.
I'm not sure if you heard me. This is Leanne. Optimistic.
Optimistic. Thank you, Leanne.
This is Diana. I'd like to say open.
Thank you.
Penny, hopeful.
Hopeful. Thank you. So perhaps that's all I'm going to get, and that's okay. And that is absolutely fine, because oftentimes we have a little bit more difficulty with our feelings than we have with our thoughts. That again is the human condition. So I ask you to explore your feelings, because as you move through your evolution of becoming or of acknowledging and addressing your unconscious biases, your feelings are going to have a large part of that process. And being able to touch and tap into those feelings and get through those feelings sometimes is going to be a challenge. So I strongly suggest that you have someone that can help you through this. Use your network, have conversations, because there is a chance for change here. And the chance is awesome, as Dushaw said to us. If we think about our diagnostics and our treatment a little bit different, if we use an implicit bias diagnosis and expand it, we can treat it better. If we think about getting out of the shame game, we can treat it better. If we think about predictive versus preventive and preventive, we can deal with it better. There's an opportunity here. And with our operating system, if I can go back to the brain, it's the neuroplasticity of the brain. The one thing in the decade of the 90s, when they started to really explore the brain and how it works, the notion before the 90s was that the brain was static. Once you got to a certain age, you couldn't develop new neural pathways. Everything was just as it is. And it was the whole notion of you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Well, what they learned is that the brain is very malleable due to its neuroplasticity. It can formulate new neural pathways with our experiences, with our learning, with our adaptation to different ways of being, thinking, and acting. So the brain does have the opportunity, I don't care how old we are, how young we are, to change based on how we engage with our environment. So everybody has an opportunity here with their personal operating system to change the way we engage with our unconscious biases. Number one, to even recognize, acknowledge, admit, and address our unconscious biases using our own inherent processes. We can move from inactivity to reactivity to proactivity. Here are 3 good books to read again. Carol Dweck speaks about mindset. And she said, it's no longer good enough to just be, we have to become. She looks at 2 mindsets, the fixed mindset and the growth or abundant mindset. Whereas the fixed mindset states, I can't do it. I can't change. And just as I think Myron said before, some people think, you know what, I am who I am and I can't change. Or some people will just say, I'm not going to change. Whereas the growth mindset says, I can't do it yet. The key term here is the yet. The yet says potential. The yet says future. The yet says I'm committed to moving forward because I got this. Maybe not right now, but I will have it and I will do it. Daniel Kahneman, a behavioral economist who won a Nobel Prize for his work on the behavioral economics. System 1 and System 2. System 1 operates automatically and quickly. That's our unconscious bias. System 2 allocates attention to the effortful mental activities that demand it. That's the conscious mind. That's the committed mind. That's the evolving mind to say, I don't have to stay unconscious about these things. I want that in my awareness. I want it up front and I want to do something about it. And not only do I want to do something about it, I want to share it with others. As Aladdin, did I say it right? As Aladdin noted. And then last but not least, Dr. Donna Hicks, the Declaration of Dignity. It's how we treat people. Imagine what the world would be like if we treated each other as if we really mattered, if we all valued each other's dignity. According to Dr. Hicks, dignity goes beyond respect. You have to earn respect, right? And it takes time to earn respect, and it takes just a hot second to break it down. But with dignity, we all come to this world with dignity, and if we treat each other such that, we would all have a better experience. It's through the empathy and the dignity that we treat each other that will change the concept or the construct. So what I'm saying to you, because remember, this isn't a training, this is a development opportunity, is to continue to learn and evolve and communicate and connect and share resources and help people understand. And don't wait for somebody to come and train you on anything. You go out there and you get it yourself. But it takes courage. You have to have courage to step out of the status quo. You have to have courage to do things differently. You have to have courage to say, yes, I do have unconscious biases, and these are my unconscious biases, but I'm working to do something about that. And you also have to say, yes, there are more unconscious biases that I hold, and I'm still trying to figure them out. And we have to exhale the fear. We have to get out of our fear, people, and our comfort Fear and comfort is what keeps the human inhibited. Fear, false events appearing real. Write it down. Fear, false events appearing real. If you don't take anything else away from this content, remember that. Fear is a primal emotion. Fear keeps us locked in. Fear keeps us from wanting to give up something to somebody else that somebody else doesn't have. Fear keeps us from opening our minds to engage with people who are different than we are. Fear keeps us wanting to have control and hoard over our resources. Fear keeps us from evolving to our true essence of being. So get out of the fear. Lean into your courage. Take a risk to do something different. Continue to learn and evolve. There's so many resources out here in this world. Tap into those resources and learn to discern which ones to hang on to and which ones to let go. This is a good place to start if you choose to. The implicit association test. Now, let me give a disclaimer here. In the discourse, there are people who are saying it's a wonderful thing to do, and there are people who are saying it's not valid, it's not this, it's not that, it's not that. We always have cheerleaders, and we always have dissenters. Do it for yourself and see what you think. If you go to the Project Implicit website, you have the option of 15 different categories that you could take, and you can take every single one of them as many times as you like, or you can take one or two. It's anonymous, and it is a research study. So my suggestion is, if you're interested, check it out. You'll perhaps really learn something about yourself. And if you're not, I'm not forcing it on you. It's just another resource. It's there for the taking. So I'm going to ask, what's your biggest takeaway from the content today? You can either put it in the chat box, Alyssa's there, or you can say it out loud. This is a really quiet group. That's the tough part about not being in the room with you.
I'd like to share. This is Vienna. So obviously some of the things I've shared have been heavy, and they weigh. Well, they weigh on my heart.
Right.
But I believe that the willingness to walk away from shaming others and dealing with my guilt is what I'm taking away from this. That's what I want to share.
Thank you. You know, we can't help others until we help ourselves first. We have to be able to understand and to accept for ourselves first before we can do for others. So I appreciate that. And it is heavy. And it does weigh heavy, especially for those of us who want to be change agents. It's work.
Just from my perspective, it seems as though it's very difficult if somebody doesn't have a healthy self-image to have a healthy image of other people and be objective. Because if we're very negative about ourselves, we're going to tend to be negative about other people, because we kind of project that on other people, and whether it's consciously or unconsciously, it still happens. And so I think a big part of this is how do we get out of all that negative feeling about ourselves so that we can be more positive about others.
Myron, I have a thought for that question. I'm going to recommend another book for anybody who's interested in what Myron just said. Positive Intelligence by Shirzad Chamine. Shirzad talks about saboteurs and how we self-sabotage because we have these voices that are speaking so loudly. There's 9 of them. And the universal of those 9, that's another conversation. Perhaps at one point we can have another development session where the judge is the universal one. And then the other 9, we have a mixture of them, but you know, the 1 or 2 of them speak up as the judge's accomplice. I'm going to suggest to you, if you or someone you know could perhaps use a resource such as that to help you to understand, again, how the brain works and how the brain sabotages our self-sabotage. And there's a way to get out of that sabotage. That's in the book as well. Or you could watch Shirzad Chamine, Shirzad. I'll repeat it, Shirzad. Last name Chamine. And you can also go to the website positiveintelligence.com. And there is an assessment there as well to help you to identify your saboteurs and start to work from there. Because you're absolutely right. It comes from within out. How we manifest to others is what's internal. So until we feel good about ourselves, we surely can't feel good about anybody else. And thank you for bringing that up. Please.
Is somebody talking?
Alyssa was giving me a comment from the chat. So if you'll give me 1 second, Penny.
Okay.
AJ and Leanne, thank you for your takeaways. I appreciate that. So one was appreciating the development opportunity, and the other one was to diligence, persistence, and open-mindedness. Those are awesome actions to take. Thank you. Thank you both so much. Penny, I'm back to you.
Well, I just wanted to make a comment about being a white person. And in 1 week, a few years ago, I had white people tell me if I was going to bring somebody to see their house and they were Black, they asked me to do it after dark so the neighbors wouldn't know that they were even considering selling it. I mean, this actually happened to me. This presumption. There was another client the same week that had nice air conditioning for the basement apartment and the first apartment, but not the upstairs. And I asked him, why was it so hot up there? And he had 2 gay guys living there, and he gave me a limp wrist motion saying they don't need air conditioning. And I realized what my people are doing to people. And I called the Human Rights Commission and I said, why is this allowed? That's how I ended up getting on that, because I was blown away at what my people were doing to others. And I just had never had that. Well, you know, you get those comments from time to time, but I had to do something about it. I couldn't stand it. It just made me ashamed to be white.
Remember, Penny, that's not your burden to carry. Those aren't your thoughts. That shame is not yours. That's not yours. You didn't do that.
Well, but it is mine if I don't do something about it.
Now there's the ticket right there, right? And you did something about it. You did what you knew to do. So therefore, that burden is not yours. And thank you for stepping up to the plate.
Well, thank the Human Rights Commission for requesting the city council to make this a law. And they did on the city, and then we also got it on the county. So our investigators would have an easier job going out there and I got so many calls back from people who had been discriminated against, but they never could go forward because there was no law against it. That was tragic.
So look what you've done to help. That is awesome. You took an action that had a huge positive impact for a lot of people. I'm so happy that you're on this. I'm honored to be talking to you, quite honestly, right now. Right? And I mean that. That's awesome.
The feeling
you acted as an ally and a voice for people who had been disenfranchised and silenced.
Yeah.
So thank you. That's awesome. So in the essence of time, I got to be wrapping it up so I don't get kicked out. Change won't come if we wait for some other person, or if we wait for some other time. We are the ones we've been waiting for, and we are the change that we seek. So it's all about, we got to make the change, and we are the models for those that come after us and that are working with us. We just can't stay silent, and we can't stay inactive. Nothing will happen. So we don't, I don't know. You were pretty silent on the other question. I can't imagine you're going to chime in here.
Hi, this is Ed.
Hi, Ed.
I'm sorry, I had to step out, and so I was working with a realtor. Sorry about that.
No worries.
But the thing that my takeaway, a couple things. One, you were talking about change. And what came to mind then is what Gandhi said, be the change that you want to see, in the world. That's one thing that came to mind. I thought also the other thing that you were talking about in the video that we watched, where the gentleman talks about aligning our thoughts, with our actions, and et cetera. That really stood out to me. Also, another thing was, he said, if we get the diagnosis right, okay, that really hit me. Then we get the treatment right. If we, and what came to mind when I heard that was all the things that we're seeing going on in our society, in our communities, in the world. The whole Black Lives Movement, the whole, all these kinds of things that we're experiencing and seeing. That if we get the diagnosis right, then we can get the treatment right.
That's awesome. Thank you, Ed. Because as he said, we've been treating the wrong problem. We've been treating the explicit.
Yep.
And we haven't been successful. That's why we're having the same conversation over and over, decades later.
Yep.
Yeah, we keep doing the same thing you've been doing. It's called what?
Stupidity.
Well, insanity for sure. Right? If you keep doing what you're doing and been doing, and you're expecting a different result, that's just insanity.
It's insanity, yes.
Yeah. So I'll tell you what, I know our time's running out. Special thanks to Deanna for bringing this together, to Alyssa for driving for me and keeping me on track, and to all of you for choosing to be here with us. This has been awesome. I greatly appreciate. I'm honored that you all invited me to be here with you, and I wish you all the best in your evolution with unconscious implicit bias. So thank you very much.
And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yep.
So just want to share that we thank Kimberly Warren for today's excellent content and presentation and the call to action. I'd like to also share with our viewers that we will be doing a follow-up to this opportunity. And we plan to put that together in October. It won't be as lengthy as the initial, but the initial was important to lay the groundwork. And so look for that invite to come out. We also plan to have 2 Lunch and Learn series in November and December. And Kimberly will be our presenter or speaker. And so we look forward to that content as well. So I thank you for joining us today, for moving forward with us today. And I want to especially thank Myron Larimer and the opportunity that he gave us to put this together. And the reason for that is because he and I had a conversation about the Long Island study. Now we know that these issues have been in existence for a very long time, but they're important to address because everyone should have the opportunity to live where they want to live, and take them as far as their dollar will, with other opportunities through banking, landlords, etc. So again, just wanted to thank Myron for that opportunity, thank Kimberly, Alyssa, and all our attendees today. And just remember, you'll see the invite come out in a couple of weeks, and it will be towards the end of October. The chat will stay open so that you are able to access some of the books and the suggestions of the videos. And Alyssa will also be emailing all this information out to the attendees as well. So thank you so much for your time. I appreciate all of you, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.